Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Lianne Picot. In this episode, we are joined by Lianne Picot, the CEO and co-founder of the Leadership Makerspace, a free online learning community that helps current and aspiring women leaders build their competence, competencies, and courage as leaders. Diana and Lianne begin by evaluating the term soft skills and whether another term is more appropriate or even necessary. They continue the discussion by examining how some individuals can flex their non-soft skills to their own detriment. Lastly, they talk about how leadership can be successful when based on trust, and how that trust is an ongoing interpersonal set of behaviors and choices that inform our relationships. Now, let's have a conversation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Soft Skills Salon podcast, an audible think tank on soft skills. I'm your host, Diana Kowarski. Hello, because as I say, conversation is the currency of communication, and we're going to have a conversation today with Lianne. I always say your surname as Picot. Would that be right? Right on, Lianne.
Yeah, that's it.
So Lianne Picot is a self-described leadership obsessive, and that she is also passionate about elevating women. As a leadership coach, consultant, and facilitator, she specializes in helping leaders and organizations become more inclusive, more inspiring, and have more impact. Lianne completed her master's in education at OISE with a focus on workplace learning and is now pursuing her PhD still at OISE, and she is examining the broken rung in the leadership ladder that is blocking women's advancement. In addition to all of this, she is the CEO and co-founder of the Leadership Makerspace, which is a free online learning community developed in a mobile app that helps current and aspiring women leaders build their confidence, competencies, and courage as leaders. All of this in addition to helping humans develop and utilize soft skills to build better relationships. Lianne has been, despite all of her successes, both in academia and in her businesses, has been unsuccessful so far in helping her kitten, Eddie, become less of a menace and more amenable to Duncan, the family dog. Hello, Lianne, and welcome.
Hi, Diana. Yes, I've given up on pet soft skills, and I'm sticking with humans.
How old is your kitten?
My kitten is 7 months old, so yes, she is a menace.
There you go. Loads of fun. Thank you so much for being here. And Lianne, I know that we have historically had our paths intersect and cross a couple of times, and I've always enjoyed speaking with you. So I am delighted and really pleased that you carved out some time to be here with me. So
thank you, Diana. I always love talking with you. I always learn something new. So it's
wow, that's so lovely. Now that we've just praised each other, perhaps we should try. Let's try and move this forward. So the first question that you selected from our questionnaire is a maybe 2 or 3 parter. And it is one, as you can imagine, as someone who's been in and around soft skills for a long time. It's quite a series of questions near to my heart. And it starts with, do you use the term soft skills? If yes, why? If not, what do you use instead, perhaps, and why that choice? Lianne, what do you think about this soft skills term?
So I do use the language reluctantly. I use it because that's how people talk about it. And so in terms of being able to effectively communicate about soft skills, we have to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. But I don't love it because I think it is, it's in the language, right? Hard, soft skills. So hard is harder and soft is easier. Mm-hmm. And in actual fact, it's the opposite way, in my opinion. Soft skills are much harder to anybody who, I coach or people that I work with, they're really scared of this aspect. They're good with the technical aspects of their job, often it's the communication. So I sometimes will use essential skills because they're pretty crucial. But I have yet to find or be able to implement with people a satisfactory kind of substitute for soft skills. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you because as the owner of the soft skills group, and you live in this full time, right? What are you seeing? What are you finding? Or how do you rationalize this for yourself? So I'm interviewing you now.
and pardon me, there's a lot in here. And I would say to you that certainly in the earlier days, and this is many, many years ago, I have clear flashbacks of referring to soft skills and being asked if that was the equivalent of esthetician skills, if I knew how to do nails or hairdressing, which has faded away, but was really around for a while. And distinguishing that space was difficult initially. And to your point, since then, there are alternatives that are perhaps equally imperfect. I have had a lot of work recently with power skills and with essential skills or people skills or non-technical skills. And none of them are a snug fit. And I can't say to you that I believe the term soft skills is necessarily a snug fit. What I will say is that in your initial words, you reveal what I hope really is becoming much more of a conscious societal bias than an unconscious societal bias. And that is that division of value assigned to hard versus soft, to the bias that we have that perhaps hard is main and soft is other, that there's a, pardon me, I've been talking so much, excuse me, that there's a distinct binary relationship necessarily. And I'm not convinced that I'm willing to give up the language because of that yet. And I might be, I don't know, but I'm not willing to say that soft is necessarily what we equate as understood to be harder, which, as you said, many people know and almost intuit it, that it is more difficult to look at those nuanced skills rather than perhaps the technical skills that are the flipping of a switch. I don't know how to add. I do know how to add, right? I don't know how to communicate what I'm adding together. That takes a lot more practice than the adding in the first place. So I don't have a replacement, but I think I do have a bit more of a white-knuckled hold on some of the politicizing of the divide. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely does. And actually, it's, you got my wheels turning because I'm thinking one of the things, and, I'm doing a lot of learning and a lot of work around gender.
Right.
And so I think you've raised something really important there, which is the masculinization of skills is where the language comes from, hard skills, right? And technical. And then so soft skills is feminization. And so, when, and I'm even challenging myself in my own head from what you just said, because it's like soft skills are harder, but for who? Because I know a lot of women in particular who are damn good at, being able to communicate, being able to collaborate, being able to create community. We see it all the time in unpaid work, for sure. Like, how do schools fundraise? How do things get done? It's usually women. And it's just it's like what you were talking about. It's what gets valued is the question. So it actually probably doesn't matter what they're called. It's what gets valued. And historically, the hard skills have been valued over soft skills. Yes, but that's why we're in the mess we are, and why I'm a leadership obsessive, because it's a mess. We need to do better on the soft skills.
I agree. And, having somewhat of not a political exclusively, but certainly a historical lens, or maybe more of a macro perspective, we have very clumsy language at best of times. However, to your point, there's there's a reason that we cling to some language because of either what's implicit or explicit in terms of the values or the beliefs, or perhaps even some of the group think that validates what is behind that language. So, I'm thinking about other language that is perhaps appropriated or misappropriated in terms of languages or causes and so on. We've had very recently the idea of being pro-choice being used in a variety of ways that, as a feminist, didn't make much sense to me whatsoever.
Absolutely right. I know.
Choice has something to do with gun control. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
No.
Pro-choice has something to do. No. So it's where we need to spend time trying to understand things. You're absolutely right.
Absolutely. That's a really good point.
So your next question is one that I'm delighted that you've chosen, because this is where I think also we can have some great thoughtful discussion. And it reads such as this. It's, when have you seen others flex their non-soft skills to their own detriment? And you can see here, Lianne, in the question, I didn't even want to go to hard skills. I was still, and I still am floundering on that. But nonetheless, when have you seen others flex their non-soft skills to their own detriment? What comes to mind?
Well, it's a layered thing. So it's interesting because I just literally said, that a lot of women leaders and women have these skill set. Well, I'm going to talk about a woman who did not have the skill set around being able to communicate effectively. She was very technically oriented. I was consulting. It was a few years ago, and I was consulting, and I was working with an organization that was trying to be more engaging externally and internally. And this leader told me that her team was not very functional. They were not able to communicate effectively. They were not able to, she was having a lot of trouble with their performance. And when they got together, they didn't talk. And so, so I was invited to a meeting, not to solve that problem, but to a meeting to participate on a project. Anyway, when I got there, the first meeting and every meeting after, the same thing occurred. The entire meeting was about technical stuff. It was literally about technology. It was about deadlines. It was about information. There was no team building. There was nothing to kind of bring the team together. Right. So I saw that right away. And everybody kept looking down at the table or at their laptops. They were not focused on her leading the team. Anyway, so what happened was, about halfway through the meeting, and because I don't do that very well, I don't sit quietly in meetings. I definitely have to either fill the space or share my opinion widely. So I said something, and she looked at me and she said, "I don't think that's true." And I said, "No, actually," and I proceeded to try and explain it. And she rolled her eyes at me.
Oh,
yes. She rolled her eyes, and I had not seen that for a very long time. And then we kept talking. She kept rolling her eyes. And then at one point she went, and I just went, "Oh, okay. So this is why your team is silent."
Right. So you got the eye roll and the sigh. You got the combination. Yeah.
Nobody's going to speak now. And so what happened was, she was in this kind of loop of not getting work done. Even though she was technically brilliant and could get this stuff done, she couldn't get her team getting the work done because she couldn't engage them, and she couldn't engage them in conversation because every time she met with them, she shut them down. Right. So it's always an interesting example that I think about, because she may have had hard skills, but the non-soft skills, as you put it, or the lack of soft skills,
right,
meant that not only was her team afraid to contribute, they were underperforming, and therefore she was underperforming. And she could not understand why, because she knew her stuff. She was good at her job, the technical aspect. She just really struggled communicating. And it created an atmosphere where people didn't feel comfortable talking.
I can tell you in my own experience, while not specifically to that, I have seen that 1-2 combination in a variety of different under sophisticated leaders, the eye roll, or even the overt turning away of the head and disconnection, and then complemented with the of defeat, that sort of withered balloon idea of just defeat. And the theme that always is at the top of my thinking in response to working with these folks, or certainly in response to your example, is the idea of self-awareness. And what I hear in part is that was a leader who did not have a vast amount of self-awareness. Would you agree with that?
Completely. And also a lack of self-reflection. What am I doing that is causing this, right? It was always other people's fault. It was her team members' fault, right? It was never her fault. So she had no awareness of who she was and how she operated in the world. And then she had no ability to stand back and kind of say, okay, how can I do this differently? There's something I'm doing here.
Right.
So yeah. And then the third part of that is she had no self-management, right? She had no ability to manage her own angry emotions. It got worse. Like we had drag down fights because I was there as a consultant and I was like, you're not doing this to me. And I will stand up and speak to you. And I cannot allow, I got into a mode, maybe it wasn't that helpful in the end, but I got into a mode of trying to show her team that she was not like, that you can challenge and you can. And so what? She eye rolled. Oh, well, move past it. That's on her. Right. So I got into this weird mode of kind of trying to model challenging the behavior to let them know it's not okay. Yeah. So.
No, absolutely. And the consequence of being on the other side of the eye roll, shining a spotlight on that, is asking some provocative questions, which, you and I have spoken about previously. And that is, what happens then, right? The earth doesn't cleave apart and suck you down into the molten lava. You have opportunity for a conversation, right? And perhaps to have some elevated levels of mutual understanding as well. So that often will take that perspective of that, consultant or a fresh set of eyes, right? I'll ask you to circle back with me, though, if you don't mind, Lianne, because the self-awareness and self-reflection combination, I've had conversations of late with a few of my clients around how that, in their opinions, and I'm struck in my own career path as to whether this is in part informed by our COVID era or not, I'm not sure, but how self-awareness and self-reflection take time, and how I've had quite literally some, I thought, surprising conversations about that not being necessarily either a valuable use or investment of one's time, or that it just takes too much darn time. And I'm a bit starstruck, just a bit gobsmacked by that. Does that resonate with you?
Yes, I hear that too. And my take on it is, again, it's about what we value. And we could talk about capitalism and talk about the constant need for generating something of economic value rather than focusing on, and getting stuff done. Yeah. And that to-do list, especially in a time when we're so distracted and scared and worried, has been everything to people, including me. Like I relied on my to-do list. I can't even remember what I've got. And, there's many reasons for that, possibly my age, but I leave the room and I'm not sure why I left it, where I went to and why. But people are, I get that. But I also think that there is a doubling down on productivity where things getting done that's more valued than people taking a step back and investing in relationships, investing in collaboration, investing in themselves and their own wellness. I'm not going to talk about self-care because in that corporatized wellness, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about feeling good about a decision we've made, or feeling good about how we've communicated with our team, and feeling like we had time to plan it, strategize, do it well. So I call BS on that stuff because I don't care. Don't stop saying you're busy. You're too busy to do this. You're not, because you're creating more problems.
I agree with you.
If you don't do that, look at what happens. You're eye rolling people, right? Like, for goodness sake.
And it's not unusual for someone with technical skills to rise in the ranks and find themselves in a position where they're suddenly a people leader and realize, oh, I'm now a people leader. What does that mean? What do I do?
It's true. And I've seen companies are separating those out sometimes, which is super interesting to me. And probably the way forward is having a technical leader and people leader. And it's recognizing that those are different skill sets. But also for people who are very technical, I always feel bad for people who are very technical because they're brilliant in their job and they just want to do more of their job or do more advanced work. Yep. And they can't do that because they get caught up in this people leadership thing. And then other people who are great people leaders are not viewed as technically brilliant. And, you're missing a whole opportunity there for somebody to help create a more effective team and better culture. So I really like that separation, actually.
I do as well. And I have seen it in a few organizations, and almost back to that binary soft versus hard conversation of previous. It then needs to be on a spectrum of different from or similar to versus better than or less than. And unfortunately, the commoditizing of it can, in some organizations, lead to the head count somehow equating to a dollar value for certain leaders versus a lesser or different head count equating other, dollar values. So there's a slippery slope that I have seen a few organizations start to tumble down. However, I agree with you. There's a reason why some of our leaders who are asked to do everything are not doing anything particularly well. Because they're asked to do everything, right?
Yeah. And on that point, Diana, sorry, can I just jump on that point for a second?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to bring it back to gender again.
Oh, yeah.
Because we see this, for example, in universities where research is valued, teaching is not. Who are the majority of researchers? Men. Who are the majority of teachers? Women, often, right? And it's seen in lots of different. So that's part of my thing around the gendered piece is that is we need to dig under where a lot of these biases come from and how they get created in organizations, because that exact pattern that you're talking about could be different, except that it's following the same biases, right? So now people leadership is the same as HR. HR is often women, so they're not as well paid as other, we're just repeating the same pattern. We're not actually doing anything different when we do that.
Well, we'll have to speak again, because I would love to speak with you about the role of HR, because I often work, I know you do too, pardon me, in tandem, in parallel, in partnership, in avoidance of, in embrace of, in and around. And HR is complicated, right? It's remarkably complicated. There's, pardon me, I'm so excited, Lianne, I'm losing my voice when I speak.
No worries.
Excuse me. So one of the questions that I have been offering in coaching sessions lately that I want to share with you, because I think that you can have a great spin on this, is I've asked folks how they feel about how they have self-represented. Have they represented themselves well in these positions, in these meetings, in these situations? And certainly, I like to get to this as a means for especially some of my coachees to get to where they do have control versus where they do not. And that can be very complicated for some of us. However, I wanted to introduce that question. What do you think about, asking, how do you feel about how you self-represented?
I love that question. I think that's a genius question, actually. And I may have to steal it. I'll credit you. But because what it does is it actually bridges the gap between self and others in a way that helps people understand why it's important to think about who you are and how you've been presenting yourself. So for a lot of people, they sit in the anxiety and it overtakes them. And so the question about self-representation is it's kind of like, how did you come across, do you think? It enables them to kind of step out of themselves and kind of look at it in a safe way, which is really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
But also it's about who I am impacts who I am, like internally impacts who I am externally. And so that question enables people to connect the dots, and probably in your coaching conversations brings that together to say that how you're feeling right now may be different to how you've presented. Right. And, or it might be the same. So if we've presented as anxious, if we're too anxious to speak, or that we're, we feel like we're, what I'm probably doing right now, which is going on and on and on and not making the point. But it's kind of like, it's a good critical thinking piece that isn't going to the heart of saying who I am as a person is, because I didn't present well, I'm crap or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in there. I'm glad you like it, because it does ask us to, do some thinking about what you're bringing, right? And how you can find some language to articulate that. But you're right. It's the perception piece. And so many of us confuse the idea of how we're being perceived with almost an exclusivity on empathy. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of empathy. However, it can't be defined as self-sacrifice.
No.
And there's that extreme approach that, the selfless leader and that whole world of thinking tends to put into play on a pedestal that I just downright refuse to buy into, because, and, we've talked about this again before, but I desperately miss business travel. So this is the business travel analogy that immediately comes to mind, which is you put your own oxygen mask on first, not so you can see others perish around you.
Yes.
Right? That's not the point. You put the mask on first on yourself in the hopes of being better service and a more of a reliable resource to others.
Yes.
And I love that idea, because it puts it into that context. And it was a lot of the thinking probably on a lot of planes and trains and anything else that would make me mobile. I tend to do a lot of my better thinking when I'm mobile. So I've been a bit thinking challenge during COVID. And that's where that question actually came from, is like, so if I'm making sure that I can be of value to others, I've got to be able to figure out what the heck I've done in the first place. So that's that self-representation piece there.
And it's so important, because in actual fact, I kind of went through a similar journey, because I used to fly all the time. I lived in the UK for a long time. And so I flew all the time. And then when I had my son and we came back to Canada, I actually remember thinking about this, because when I flew all the time, when they would do that announcement, when I wasn't a parent, and they would do that announcement, I'd be like, that is so selfish. Like, why would you put your thing on first? Wouldn't you look after your little kid beside you? Like, why would you do that? And then when I was on the plane with my 5-month-old baby coming to Canada and they made the announcement, I went, oh, I get it.
Yeah. Right.
It was literally a moment where it just clicked, where I was just like, if I'm passed out, he can't do anything. So it took that moment. I'm not saying it takes everybody that moment, but for me, that was a real moment. But it's the same with leadership, where people think they're being selfish by spending time thinking about something or spending time looking after themselves a little bit. And I always say the same thing. I'm just like, you cannot serve others in a state of chaos, and you taking that moment and that time to think about how you feel, what you want to say, how you want to say it, and who you want to say it to is everything.
I agree.
It's everything,
right? I agree. And
you can't take that moment back. You cannot take it back. So if you haven't done all that and you erupt and burst out because you've been holding it in rather than having a measured conversation that you've strategized and thought about, you can't, that's it. You've lost their trust. They're not going to trust you.
You're absolutely right. And what I hear is one of the themes in one of the courses I teach at Schulich, I try and bring people's attention to the difference between a first impression. And, there's a lot of oxygen in media around first impression and how to make one and how to recover and all that stuff. And instead, I try and bring people to the idea of habitual impressions,
Nice.
right? And the idea of a habit means that you've chosen a particular activity and you do it again and again. And it sounds quite simplistic. However, to each of your points, Lianne, preparing even, a few nanoseconds of preparation to check in, that self-awareness, that self-reflection. What am I feeling? And even I take that even further if you wanted to have some personal development of, okay, so I feel scared versus I am feeling the, fear.
Yes.
Right? It's that separation, that mild depersonalization, that inferred objectivity. But it is how we feed those relationships, to your point, that if we haven't done some of that work, and it's not sexy work at times. I can't tell you that I self-reflect and I always see lovely things in there. I sometimes
I hear that.
It can get murky. It's murky. However, the idea to be self-representative, if I'm showing up, there's a bigger likelihood of me blowing up versus me showing up and being able to self-represent, having had just some foundation for myself, right? And you must see this in particular, going back to the gender piece, in working with women. I talk about calm. And when I talk about calm, I'm not talking about comatose and boring and bringing people down. I'm talking about calm that you need to find within yourself. And I usually phrase it as, the new 4-letter word that starts with C.
Awesome. I love it.
But I think calm is the result of some of this,
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely. It is because we're managing ourselves. We're paying attention to ourselves. And it's that kind of emotional intelligence piece,
right,
around, understanding how we're feeling and how it can impact us. But also, and again, it's funny because we're talking about leadership, but it's the same with anybody in any level in any work.
Right.
Like you said before, like how you represent and how you turn up and how you are, forms a view of you. And for leaders in particular, though, you're on show all the time. You're on show, you're on the stage.
Yeah.
And when we focus too much on worrying about whether people think we know stuff, and we need to it's more about, can they trust us? If I make a mistake, can I go and talk to Lianne because she's, calm? Or can I ask Diana a question? Is she going to be calm? I love that. It's everything. It's so important.
And it does have a direct relationship with trust that, is a word you've brought up a few times, and it's a complicated word. However, it's an undercurrent to my understanding of so many of these interpersonal choices.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. The third question we're going to touch on, and I appreciate that we could keep talking for a long, long time, is one that I think we've already preemptively answered. And it sounds like this: what does success leading others look like to you? Any thoughts on that you want to share?
Yeah, I think it is having a positive impact on their professional journey. That's it. Really, it's about, they're here with us for a minute and then they go off somewhere else. And so for me, I want to make sure that they remember me as somebody who helped them, bring their best self to work and do their best life.
Positive impact on their professional journey. And, so many people, if I ask the question, think back to that underskilled leader that you may have had at some point, whether past or present. I've yet to have someone say, "Oh, I can't think of anyone."
Yeah.
I love that idea also of, perhaps this is a modern approach, whatever modern really means right now in this COVID era, but perhaps it is a modern approach that individuals' careers are their journey, and it's not company specific or role specific. It's their journey. That's a big divide, right?
It's a big shift, and it's one that companies need to make. because we don't, like, as a leader and as a company, we don't own them.
What?
Right? I know, crazy thought. What? I give them money, I must own them. No.
And they're not going to stay for 50 years and wait for the gold-plated watch.
Moment in time.
Yeah.
Moment in time.
Absolutely. And this has been a very brief moment in time with you, Lianne. It's always a pleasure. Can I ask you, though, are there any resources? Is there a website or any of your own work that you want to bring our attention to in terms of listeners that might help them continue on their learning journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just, my business partner and I for the Leadership Makerspace are just finishing up developing our new app. Leadershipmakerspace.com is the website. It will be launched in June. So if you want to be invited to the launch, Lianne at leadershipmakerspace.com. You can't download it yet, but it's for women. Women plus. If you identify as a woman, you're welcome. And it is for, helping to create this space for conversations like these. And we have courses and conversations, but it's really about community and trying to collaborate to create a different kind of leadership.
Fantastic, Lianne. Well, I wish you every success with the launch. I will certainly be a part of that community, and I look forward to hopefully you and I connecting again in some way, shape, or form, maybe even on this podcast. Again, you're more than welcome to come back on the other side of that launch and to hear about how maybe soft skills has been influenced or is a part of that experience as well. Thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing about your successes. Okay.
Thanks, Diana. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.